begins. Okay, well, that's a good sign. And I assume, Mickey, I can share the screen. Good evening, Caroline. How are you?
You can.
You're muted, so I couldn't hear you.
You can, yes.
Good evening, Baruch Hashem. I hope you're also fine, Rabbi.
I'm fine, thank you. Very well indeed. Excellent, yeah.
Baruch Hashem.
I too bless the Lord. Share screen, there we are. Okay, world of the Responsa. And let's go up, to the beginning. Well, okay, we'll be here a while. Let's see. We can do it a little faster. And here we are. Okay. So I'm just going to read the rest of the Rambam's tshuva. He lived in Egypt, major Karaite community there, very well established, very well connected to the running of the country, and a very intellectual group. And one would not want to offend them. And they found the modus vivendi between the Rabbinites and the Karaites. Egypt was the place, as we'll see next week when we talk about the issue of marrying Karaites. Can you, as an Orthodox Jew, marry a Karaite? Well, next week we're going to read about that. But now we're just talking about teaching them, spending time with them, treating them with respect. Rambam began by saying, yes, it's reciprocal. They treat us with respect, we treat them with respect. And then we bury their dead, and we visit them, and we talk, and we discuss, and we teach them. But if they publicly profane our festivals, and they abuse us, then, of course, we are not going to have anything to do with them. But he goes back, or there is an extra bit of the tshuva that says on line 6, Umalinan libanayu b'shabta. They're Jewish. And if the 8th day falls out on a Shabbat, we're going to do a Brit Milah on their sons. After all, why should they pay for their parents' Karaism? Va'avid lohu milah, and we will do the Brit Milah upriyah, and we will do whatever we do when we do the Brit. The Dilma nafik minayhu zara malia. Perhaps the child will grow up to be actually a rabbinic Jew. V'hadri b'tshuva, and he will repent. V'hachi ashkechina l'Rabbi Chai Gaon Zatzal. Damar hachi Rabbeinu Hai supported that approach. Ulinyan milah me'olam lo ninu rabotenu aleim hashalom milamul et bneihem shel kareim b'Shabbat. We don't find that the rabbis, Orthodox rabbis, did not do circumcisions on the Karaite boys on the Shabbat even, because they have a potential to actually come back to the right way when they grow up. Tanya, and we learned non-Jews, because of Darkei Shalom, good relations, we will support their poor. Mipnei Darkei Shalom, umavakrin chole goyim im chole Yisrael, and we are going to visit them when they are sick, just as we visit our Jewish co-religionists. V'kovrin metei goyim im metei Yisrael mipnei Darkei Shalom. If we have to, we'll bury them in the same cemetery. Kol shekain elu shehen mitolat Yaakov. How much more for those who are actually Jewish? Karaites are Jewish. Nobody says they aren't. Okay? They are Tolat Yaakov. Now, that's, of course, a pasuk from Yeshayahu, chapter 41. Al tir'i Tolat Yaakov. Do not fear. Why Tolat? Rashi says because Israel is weak. It's like a Tolat. It's like a worm. And therefore, it is afraid. So Yeshayahu calls us Tolat Yaakov and says, do not be afraid. So perhaps that phrase, because the Karaites are not the best of Yaakov, they're not the Gaon Yaakov, the pride of Yaakov, they are Tolat Yaakov. We can put them down a bit, but they are nevertheless descendants of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. V'yeinam lefi sichri en bot sad isur. And their wine is not forbidden. And that's often the acid test, whether somebody is accepted as being halakhically Jewish or not. If you want to punish people for deviating, they will say their wine is stam yain. But we don't do that with the Karaites in this tshuva of the Rambam. Shareyen kutim haya kvar b'chezkat heter Yisrael ad shematzu lahem dumut yonah bahar grizim. Famous Gemara in Chulin about the kutim, and the kutim were again accepted as Jews, okay, until they found an idolatrous image on Har Grizim. Now, once they were proven to be pagans, then they were moved into the non-Jewish world. Lo zazu misham ad she'asaum goyim gemurim, says the Gemara. Okay? Perush lo tam she'ushochlim bahar grizim. But only those who are on Har Grizim. There were more Samaritans. Even though they were a miut, they were only a small number of the Samaritan community. Halachically speaking, when it comes to Yei Nesech, then we treat them in minority as the majority. Rabbi Meir's view there in Chulin is the chayish l'miuta. We do take the minority into consideration, the gazru al yeinam. But this is not the case with the Karaites. Nobody has ever said that they are pagans or they are not held out as believers in the Jewish God and in Judaism. They just have a different way of interpreting the Torah that separates them from the Rabbinite community. Now, the truth is that as time goes by, the tensions between the Rabbinites and the Karaites grow, not so much in Egypt, but in the rest of the East and in the Balkans, where there were Karaites. In other words, the situation becomes more hostile. The Rabbinites dig in their feet and regard the Karaites as evil heretics. The Karaites are put off by the Rabbinites, but the thing with the Karaites, of course, like every splinter group, they would always want to have recognition by the Rabbinites. In other words, if you are a member of a minority in your religion, you want the majority to give you some legitimation. Happens all the time. Non-Orthodox Jews are happy when the Orthodox are nice to them, or perhaps agree that they do have legitimacy.
Okay.
And Orthodoxy is very sensitive.
Our story that I'm going to do before we move on to the next bit of the Responsa world took place.
Hello? Ian, are you speaking?
No,
So who is speaking?
wasn't me.
Okay, I don't hear or see anybody.
But I want to ask something.
Okay, Jean, before we move on, yes.
This response is very perplexing.
So let's read it and then we can be perplexed. We'll all be perplexed together, okay? So by the time we get to the 15th and 16th centuries, it's a bit like Orthodox and Reform. Nobody's talking to each other. And many Orthodox rabbis are saying have nothing to do with them. In fact, the sooner we get rid of them, the better. Now, we have two protagonists in this period in Constantinople. Let's begin to read, and we'll take it from there. Jack, you're first on the list. Well, no, actually, you're not. Ian, you're on. Unmute. Okay. Line 16.
In this period, Constantinople Jewry was at the peak of its prosperity, political influence, and intellectual flourishing. There were more than 40 synagogues in the city, many of which had been established by Spanish and Portuguese refugees, including a large number of Marranos.
So you have the original, what we call Romaniots, Jews of Greek or Southern Italian descent, who arrived in southern Italy and the whole of the Grecian islands and archipelago in Second Temple times. They spoke a language called Yevanic, mixture of Hebrew and Greek, and they had rabbis and yeshivot, and they had many famous rabbis as well. But then, of course, to that area, which has now gone from being Byzantium, Christian Byzantium, to the Ottoman Muslim Empire, or the Muslim Empire, we have the Spanish refugees, the Sephardim. Eventually, the Sephardim would swallow up the Romaniots, okay? Just like, in a way, today there are no real Yekkes, they're all either... Hello? We need somebody to mute here.
The word Yekkes, so you got into trouble.
The Yekkes don't really exist anymore. They've either become Hasidim or Litvaks. That's the general wisdom. But
Don't say that. You're
okay,
paining my heart.
there could be some. There could be some around, but they're still a very small group. Okay, and if you look at their children, as I said, they generally tended to become either Hasidim or Litvaks. Very few stayed echte Yekkes. Anyhow, so we've got this very strong and very rich Jewish community here, and the Karaites were a strong and influential group. Would you give us another sentence or two, please, Ian? Line 19.
The Karaites were a strong influential group in the city. There was a lot of intellectual interaction between them and the rabbinites.
So that's interesting. There's a lot of intellectual discussion because, as we saw last time, the difference between Karaites and Rabbinites was the interpretation of the Torah. What does the Torah mean? And they had some interesting things to say, and the rabbis had to be sharp and develop an understanding of Torah in order to counteract the Karaites. Okay, Marcel, don't go away. You're on.
Come on, where are we?
Yeah, line 20, the Chacham Bashi, which is like the chief rabbi. Now, he sat in the divan. That is, he sat with the Sultan, together with the head of the Muslim community and the Christian community. Okay, so the rabbi had a very important role. The Chacham Bashi of the Ottoman Empire at the time.
The Hambashi of the Ottoman Empire at the time was Rab Elijah Mizrahi, 1455 to 1525, who was an outstanding posek and a major commentator on Rashi on the Torah.
Anybody who learns Rashi inevitably gets to read Mizrahi, the Re'em, okay? He's one of the three major commentators on Rashi, together with the Maharal, in the Gur Aryeh and the Maharsha, okay? So, I mean, it is still to this day, major commentator on Rashi, was an outstanding posek, head of the yeshiva, and the Chacham Bashi of the entire Ottoman Empire. Apparently,
during his absence from the city, a group of men tried to force through a harem, an excommunication ban, against all those who were instructing Karaites in both Jewish and general topics.
So this is an example of Orthodox intolerance. Get rid of the Karaites. Far too many rabbinites are teaching Karaites. So clearly there was a lot of interaction there. Now, I want to say a little bit about, but finish the sentence, Marcel.
At the beginning of his Responsa,
excommunication ban,
which runs to 33 columns, he provided a
right, at the beginning of the response, and you're right, 33 columns. I couldn't translate them all. He provides
a detailed and somewhat shocking account of the actual events that led to the pronunciation of the herem.
The herem of the ban. Now, I want to say a little bit about Rabbi Eliyahu Mizrahi and about a certain Rabbi, Moshe Kapsali, who was also a Romaniot, as was Mizrahi, whose ancestors traced their roots to the immigration of Jews in the Second Temple times to Greece. Now, he was born and raised in Constantinople. He studied Torah, great posek, Talmid Chacham, but also mathematics and astronomy with Rabbi Mordechai Komentina. And he knew Greek and Arabic. had many Karaite students, and as I said, he sat on the divan, that is the council for the Sultan. Now, in addition to his commentary on Rashi, he wrote something called Sefer HaMispar. John, have you heard of Sefer HaMispar? What happened to Jean? Yes or no? Jean, have you heard? Unmute. Unmute. We can't hear you.
God.
All right. When you work out how to unmute, you're welcome to come back on board. But Sefer HaMispar means the book of the number. Mizrahi wrote a book on addition, multiplication, division, and they say the square root. And in Basel, in 1546, there was a Christian Hebraist called Sebastian Minster, who printed a number of the Mizrahi's books, and he added a Latin commentary. I see that you're back on board, Jean, okay?
Yeah.
So this is interesting because in the St. Petersburg Library, there's a manuscript of the Mizrahi commentary on the Al-Majest that you showed us, right?
No. I don't know. Donc the contribution of the Mizrahi on the Al-Majest is unknown to me.
Well, now it is. It
Yes.
is a manuscript in St. Petersburg. As I said, he may have discovered the square root. And in addition, we know that he wrote a commentary on Euclid's geometry. So what you have here, a bit like Rambam, somebody out of the mold of the regular Orthodox rabbi you find, really a very talented mathematician, astronomer, and an intellect. He was very well regarded by the non-Jews in the Ottoman Empire at the time. And it also fits that, like the Rambam, he would have had the time and the interest to sharpen his intellect by arguing over what the Torah really meant with the Karaites. And because when you argue with somebody who has a different point of view, your position often becomes much sharper. That was why he enjoyed his intellectual contact with the Karaites. But to his more fundamentalist colleagues, this wasn't the right thing to do. Now, the rabbi of Constantinople was Rabbi Moshe Kapsali. He was a very fiery-tempered figure, very concerned to preserve rabbinic Judaism, extremely anti-Karaite, and he also got involved with a lot of rabbis of his time in a lot of fights. Famous fight he had with the Maharik, Rabbi Yosef Kolon. So now we know about the cast of our characters. Let's read and see what happened next. So I'm going to go down the list. Jack, are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Good. Line 27 with regard to the ban.
With
Now,
regard to the ban,
Mizrahi came back to town, back to Constantinople, and there's been a coup. Some Jews have forced through a cherem with a shofar and the black candles and the lot against any Orthodox rabbinite who teaches the Karaites anything. So what is he going to do? So he writes 33 columns, and let's begin. With regard
to the ban that came about when some of the men of the congregations in Constantinople, together with some of the leaders of the city, gathered in the Apulia synagogue.
That's a city in southern Italy. Again, as I said, the Jews, the Romaniot Jews trace their ancestors in both southern Italy and in Greece, going back to the time of the Beit. Okay, line 29, to proclaim a ban.
To proclaim a ban that no one shall teach the Karaites any subject in the world, neither Torah, nor Mishnah, nor Talmud, nor Halacha, nor Agadah, nor interpretations of scripture, whether they follow the plain meaning of the text or are derived from the tradition, nor of any of the sciences which the Greek sages had developed, neither philosophy, nor physics, nor metaphysics, nor arithmetic, nor algebra, not even the alphabet.
In other words, it's a bit like saying no contact with the Karaites. And we see from here that the Karaites came to the Rabbinites to study and to learn. Question is, are you going to share your knowledge with people who are not thinking and practicing Judaism the same way as you? They sent for the rabbi.
They sent for the rabbi, who leads the congregations of Constantinople, and asked him to proclaim this ban.
Now, this was apparently Rabbi Kapsali, but Rabbi Mizrahi is very polite, doesn't want to actually name him.
But he refused, saying that it is against the law to forbid that which is permitted.
So whilst Rabbi Kapsali was anti-Karaite, he was a Talmid Chacham, and he says, well, actually, why can't you teach them science, okay? There's nothing halachically wrong with that. This is a matter of, if you like, of politics or religious ideology or a desire to protect the Rabbinite community from the influence of the Karaites. So next, we're going to have, thank you, Jack. Who else do we have here on the line? Fabia, you're next. So can we get you to read from the end of line 35? It is well known.
It is well known that the sciences developed by the wise men of the Greeks are based solely on their intelligence and speculative powers, and as a result, anyone is within his rights to teach them to Christians, Ishmaelites, or Karaites, or anyone else whom they wish to instruct. No prohibition whatsoever is involved in such pedagogic activity. How then can one declare a ban against it? But the rabbi saw that these men paid no attention to his word, so he postponed his decision until the next day.
A bit like Aaron of the golden calf. You're asking me to do something I really don't want to do, but let's sleep on this. And tomorrow we will work it out. But this lot were much more cluey. The pro-ban group.
The pro-ban group, realizing that the rabbi was stalling for time, made every member of the group swear to gather early in the morning and to carry out their plan, no matter how much opposition there was to its implementation. When the pedagogues, those who taught the Karaites, heard this thing, they cried out against the potential ban makers, claiming that what they were trying to do flew in the face of ancient practice, and that many great rabbis of the past had engaged in teaching not only Karaites, but all manner of Gentiles in order to earn a decent livelihood.
Now, there's quite a long list here, certainly in Spain. Certainly it happened in Spain, but we know about Rabbi Baruch Levita, who was employed 15 years by a cardinal in Rome to teach Hebrew, and it wouldn't be the only case of a rabbi. Even Rabbi Yonatan Eibeshitz, much later, and in a different country in Bohemia, would instruct Christian priests, bishops, etc., in Hebrew so that they could encounter what was written in the Torah. But again, this wasn't your regular Orthodox rabbi who was going around and teaching Christians scripture or Hebrew, okay? So, thank you, Fabia. Shmuley, you're on. Rabbi Mizrahi.
Then describes how the pedagogues went to the rabbi to plead their cause, and that he agreed with them and promised to act on their behalf on the next day. The pro-ban party went to the Apulia synagogue and hired thugs armed with staves to keep any opponent of the ban out of the synagogue.
If you think violent demonstrations were not part of Jewish life in the past, well, here we are. They hired thugs armed with sticks to keep the liberal elements out. When the rabbi arrived,
he was admitted into the synagogue, but he was threatened and told that if he does not support the ban, he would be replaced as rabbi of the congregations in Constantinople.
He'd be fired, finding himself alone.
In the face of the multitude that supported the ban, he kept quiet. 3 Sifrei Torah were then taken out, and the cherem against teaching the Karaites was solemnly proclaimed.
Okay, Avi, please, after reciting.
After reciting all the relevant facts of the case, Rabbi Mizrahi launches into an extremely lengthy and extensive discussion of the laws governing the imposition of a cherem in Jewish law, and concludes that in this particular case, the ban governs no one but those individuals who proclaimed it. Even those who were present in the Apuli synagogue but did not verbally confirm the cherem are free from following it. Indeed, even if he held a Sefer Torah but did not verbally affirm the ban, he is not bound by it.
So the 20 columns I'm going to spare you, okay? It's about the laws of cherem. But let's have one more sentence as far as teaching the Karaites Torah.
As far as teaching the Karaites Torah and secular sciences is concerned, Rabbi Mizrahi makes the following points in order to declare this activity totally free of any halachic prohibition.
Okay, so I'm now going back to my list. Fabia, I see you on the top. So you're going to have to read again, please. Line 26A. Unmute. Unmute. Now you're gone.
Okay, now I'm back.
Okay.
The Talmud does indeed prohibit the teaching of Torah to Gentiles. Hagigah.
Now, it is forbidden to teach Torah to a goy, and it comes up in relation to conversion. If somebody's being taught Torah and they haven't converted yet, how can you teach them Torah? So the answer is that you can teach them because they're being converted, but they mustn't actually practice Torah. So in Orthodox circles, it's very common for a conversion candidate to be told, you must do something forbidden on Shabbat. Okay? You keep all of Shabbat, but at least turn on a light, blow out a candle, do something, because we don't want you to be fulfilling the Torah entirely whilst you're still not Jewish. But even on the assumption, line 27.
But even on the assumption that Karaites fall into this category, and this is by no means established halacha, the prohibition does not extend to secular subjects. Indeed, the Talmud provides evidence of discussions between the sages and Gentiles in relation to matters of Greek wisdom, such as astronomy and
What goes round? The sun goes around the earth, or the earth goes around the sun?
And it is well established that Maimonides taught non-Jews a wide range of secular subjects,
especially science and medicine. So, okay, that's the secular subject. How about teaching Torah to the Karaites? Marcel, you're next.
In relation to the Torah itself, we find that Rav Yohanan ben Zakkai explained Torah to the Sadducees in order to refute their interpretations. Bava Batra 115b. Rashbam, in his commentary on that passage, seemed to accept as given the prohibition on teaching Sadducees Torah, but explains that it recedes in the face of the need to justify the rabbinic approach to Torah exegesis.
Which is exactly what the Rabbanites and the Karaites were doing in the Ottoman Empire. Whose approach to the text is the correct? Theirs, or if you like, ours? Do we count the Omer from the first Sunday after Pesach or the second day of Pesach? And what proof can we bring from the Tanakh? Rabbi Mizrahi adds,
if one is engaged in a debate with a sectarian and does not take it seriously enough to fully explain the rabbinic understanding of the Torah, then the result will be a Hillel Hashem.
And if you're asked a question and you give a pathetic answer, then it's a Chilul Hashem. So for a Kiddush Hashem, you have to engage with your position and defend your position in a impressive fashion. C.
Rab Mizrahi observes that ever since the recent decline in debates with Karaites over the true meaning of the Torah, as a result of the extremist pressure, the rabbinites have become less sharp in their Torah studies, and this is surely a much greater threat to rabbinism than dialoguing with the Karaites.
So this is an interesting question. Okay, Rabbi Mizrahi says, and you know what? We've lost our edge. We don't study Torah. We don't take it seriously because we're not engaging with the Karaites, with the Karaim, and therefore we lose. So what is more important? To increase your intellectual understanding of Torah by sharpening your views against those of the Karaites, or retreating behind a iron wall and saying nothing to do with you, and then becoming less intellectually sharp. And in case you don't believe me, I'm going to read the Hebrew. This ban is going to produce destruction. Because we see, and remember, he is the author of this very penetrating commentary on Rashi on the Torah, and it's not taken seriously enough. The yeshivot are only learning Gemara, and what happened to the penetrating analyses of the text of the Torah? Nobody can deny. When we stopped teaching the Karaites, we lost our edge. Till we have no expertise in Torah exegesis at all. When you are engaged in an intellectual debate and arguing with someone, you're going to improve yourself and the quality of your analysis. But there's no more of that spirit of achieving excellence. And we've lost our edge in terms of Torah study. Okay, Ian, can you give us line 10, please? Following Maimonides.
Following Maimonides in the Mishneh Torah, Rabbi Mizrahi draws a distinction between present-day Karaites and their hardcore antecedents. They are to be regarded as tinokim rather than tinokot. I'm reading what's written there. Rather than wicked individuals whom we are required to leave to their death.
That's what we saw in the Rambam, in the Mishneh Torah. So that's a point that has been made before. And number E. Ian, since you're here, and a loud voice, please. We want you to do some voice production here, please.
Rabbi Mizrahi cites Maimonides' respectful response on relationships with the Karaites and the position attributed in it to Rav Chai in support of his conclusion that it is permitted to teach them Torah provided that they show respect to our sages, refrain from desecrating our festivals in public, and hold out the prospect of changing their ways in the future.
Okay, so now we're going to read.
Let me just comment. That must be the main issue. That must be the main issue. What are they doing with this teaching? Are they politically stirring it up, or are they using it to try to understand the other side?
They are trying to understand the other side and also disprove the other side. So you're engaging, but you're engaging with them. And then there is a risk. If I engage with somebody who doesn't have my approach to Judaism, there's always a suspicion that I might say, you know what he or she is saying is actually quite impressive, or probably very close to the truth. So, it's always the problem in Orthodoxy, even today. How open should we be to other views? And many Orthodox rabbis will say, have nothing to do with them. You may remember there's something called limud in England. It was meant to embrace a wide a wide section of Jewry, and then the more frum followers, especially of Dayan Ehrentreu, the late Dayan Ehrentreu, set up a competition called Encounter, and they bussed a lot of Jews from Manchester or Gateshead down to London, and they held an encounter to, as it were, act as a competition to this much wider. So it's a question of fear against possible benefits, but also possible threat. And you may, as an Orthodox rabbi, find yourself perhaps being perceived as a little too keen or interested in giving legitimation to those who are officially not within the fold. Okay? So nothing has changed, all right?
Yeah.
These are exactly the arguments that Rabbi Eliyahu Mizrahi offers, and he wants to be broad. And he says, we lose if we do not engage with these Karaim and try and make our understanding of Torah as sophisticated as possible. If you don't have that competition, then you generally just retreat into your own very small world, and then you lose certainly this intellectual edge. But it's always a tense matter. So let's have a look. Let's go up. Let's go back up again, and line 17. Marcel, you're on.
Again, okay. He
Yeah.
also cites Rabbi Eliyahu Halevi and Rabbi Eliezer Kapsali.
The Kapsalis were a large family, as I said, and they were there. This one lived quite a time before. Both of whom
were exceptionally pious, and both would teach Torah Shebal Peh to the children of the Karaites on condition that they would refrain from desecrating the festivals, show respect to the sages, both contemporary and ancient.
Now, there is, of course, Ian, this reciprocity here. We're going to engage with you, but not if you're going to insult us to our face. But if there's a cordial atmosphere of mutual respect, then by all means, okay? They continued.
To teach, notwithstanding the objections of Rab Moses Kapsali.
And we mentioned him and brought
several proofs for their position, including a Kal V'chomer from the fact that it is permitted to circumcise their children on the Shabbat. Rab Mizrahi then recounts that he read from Rab Mordechai Komatina in the name of
teacher in both Torah, astronomy, and mathematics, in the name of his revered teacher,
Rab Hanoch Sasportas, who was one of the great sages of Catalonia, and an expert on the entire Talmud, a spiritual guide to multitudes, and an exceptional Hasid, that it was permitted without any doubt to teach the Karaites anything they wished to learn, be it Talmud, Poskim, Rashi on the Torah, or secular sciences. He concluded by saying,
Ve'en safek, there's no doubt, shehu ra'ui lismoch aleihem. Mizrahi says, I rely upon these great men. B'pnei shayu ba'alei horah, they were great authorities in halakha, u'ba'alei ma'aseh. Remember, tshuva is ma'aseh. They actually gave real-life decisions. U'mi yuchal lepakpek al hora'atam. And who are we to doubt their rulings? At the end of this section, Marcel.
The end of this section of his responsum, Rabbi Mizrahi returns to the theme of the damage caused to Torah learning amongst the rabbinites as a result of not engaging with the Karaites in Torah study.
He goes back to the same theme. שזה החרם שהחרימו שלא ילמדו חכמים לקראים, יש בו גורם עבירה. He says that the ban even consists of a sin perpetrated by the ones who are making the ban. כמו שביארנו כי בסיבות מניעות לימוד הקראים, נמנע גם הרבנים מלימודם, ומכיוון שכן, we learn less, he says, if we're not engaged with the Karaites. לא די שאין החרם הזה חל על אותם שלא קיבלוהו, אלא אדרבה, המחרימים על זה עוברים על שגרמו למנוע תורה, וראוי לבקש רחמים על שגגתם. The pro-ban party are causing Torah to become lessened. In concluding his responsum So I go down and I see Ian, you're on again. Line 35.
Okay, so in concluding the responsum, Rabbi Mizrahi cast serious aspersions on the sincerity of those who proclaim the cherem.
And now we get into the personal aspect. Why were they wanting to declare a ban? What's really going on here? In his view,
Yes, in his view, their motives were personal and not at all principled. And the ban is invalid also for this reason, namely that it was not imposed in the name of Hev B'Shem Shamayim, as were other bans which had been imposed in the past for the benefit of society.
there's cherem d'Rabbeinu Gershom that you mustn't marry more than one wife. That was there to make society better, okay? That's a good cherem. This is a bad cherem. This ban, however,
was imposed because of jealousy and hatred which the perpetrators of the ban felt for the pedagogues.
Actually, there is a split inside the Jewish community. Those who teach the Karaites apparently were very well paid and were given a lot of respect and perhaps juicy jobs because the Karaites were very well placed within the running of the Ottoman Empire. So the banners were actually motivated by personal jealousy and possibly wanting to hit both their colleagues and also the Karaites themselves. Now, what does he say? Including were jealous of the honor that the teachers received from the Karaites, including generous fees.
Trivializes everything. There's nothing new here. It trivializes everything. The perpetrators were jealous of the honor that the teachers received from the Karaites, including generous fees for their instruction. Some of them were moved by hatred against the Karaites because of the interest on loans that they had to pay them. Indeed, all collectors of interest are hated world over.
So there we are. Rabbi Mizrahi says, and they hated the Karaites because they were allowed by the Ottoman Empire to collect the taxes. Now, tax farmers are generally disliked all over the world, says Mizrahi. And I'm reading out the bit, line 8. And some of those in favor of the ban, they hated the Karaites. מצד השנאה שנפלה ביניהם, בסיבת הריבית שהיו לוקחים מהם, כמשפט כל בעלי הריבית, שהם שנואים תמיד בעיני כל העולם. And they would charge interest. In other words, you needed to pay your tax. You didn't have enough money. They offered you a loan. The loan came with interest, and you resented having to pay your interest. So any way that you could get rid of these tax masters, you try to. So it was a matter of getting revenge and getting rid of them. And everybody knows that there were very mixed motives here. Whenever you have a group that apparently says we are zealous in the name of religion and we're going to hit another group, there may be more at stake than what you think. It's often not purely for the sake of heaven, but there are other considerations going on. Rabbi Mizrahi cites various sources to prove the ban is imposed by a sage for its own interest. Perhaps it's conflict of interests, a subject that has come up perhaps in today's state of Israel on more than one occasion. It's clearly valid according to all opinions. Okay, if you're doing things because you're self-serving, then that is a problem. The final argument. So who do I see? Who's left here? Let's see. Fabia. Or Shmuley. Actually, you've read twice. Shmuley's only read once. Shmuley, let's have line 13, please.
The final argument is that the ban is invalid because it has not been widely accepted, especially by the many refugees from the Iberian Peninsula who were accustomed to teaching the Karaites.
Iberia consists of which two countries?
Spain and Portugal.
Wow, okay. That's
proving that ab initio it was a
and what does ab initio mean?
From the beginning, initially.
Exactly. It was a
that the people couldn't keep to it.
Exactly.
Similar to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi's ban
No,
on
no,
Gentile.
Nicaea.
Ah,
Several
Nicaea.
generations later was another
Okay.
Rabbi who done Nicaea, and he banned non-Jewish oil. Shemen
Heter
akum.
Shemanim.
Exactly, shemen akum. And what happened? It was annulled.
Once it transpired that the majority of the community could not abide by it because they needed to use the oil.
Exactly,
Indeed,
and they didn't have the resources to make Jewish oil.
Indeed, Rabbi Yehuda and his Bethin officially revoked their ban once the situation on the ground came to light. And another
So
good
there we
pun.
are. If you think that the Karaites and the Rabbanites were just this nice little social clutch, you're wrong. It was open war. The Karaites generally lost their influence after the 16th century, and they're a very small community today. There's a whole bunch of them, I think, in Ashdod, okay? And the next thing we'll come to is what the state of Israel did about marrying into the Karaite community. Can you marry a Karaite? It's all very well to teach them Torah, to socialize with them, to visit them on Shabbat or Chag if they do not treat your Chagim or Shabbatot with contempt. But can you actually marry? And here we come to an interesting question of Jewish family law and mamzerut. So we're going to start this now, and then we will see what happened. So Shmuley, I'm going to get you to continue, okay? Line 20. Karaites.
Karaites are considered unfit to testify, hence their weddings are halachically invalid since there are no valid witnesses.
Okay. Now, Karaite is Rasha because he doesn't keep the halacha. And we know that if you have a non-halachic witness at your wedding, you are in a good position to declare the wedding invalid. So it's an interesting tension here. On the one hand, we all want to have kosher witnesses. And when we go to the rabbi to get married, he'll say, who are your witnesses? Okay, Eidei Kiddushin. There mustn't be family members. There must be sane. There mustn't be blind, deaf, dumb. And they must not be Rishaim. They must be observant Jews. So often in Israel, it means that the rabbi and the mashgiach are the ones who actually witness the giving of the ring. But actually, it might be better if a few years down the line, you want to get rid of your husband and he refuses to give you a get, might be much more convenient to have Mechalalei Shabbat as your witnesses, because then you could say the witnesses are the Rishaim. There are no witnesses to the valid witnesses to the wedding, then the wedding is not a valid wedding, and you were never married. What were you doing? You were living promiscuously with your Jewish boyfriend, okay? You may have brought 10 children into the world, but you were never really halachically married. So in a way, it's kind of an interesting tension here between the desire to be kosher and have a valid halachic wedding, but on the other hand, might be useful, because we never know how these things turn out, down the line to have actually had an invalid witness or two. But leaving that aside, very clear that a Karaite wedding, and the Karaites do have their weddings and have a chuppah, but the witnesses are Karaites, so they don't keep the same laws as we do. So they are Rishaim technically, and they're not valid witnesses. This means, Shmuley,
This means that a married Karaite couple live together promiscuously as far as halacha is concerned.
so they just live together, okay? Znut, as it were. The fact that
Karaite divorce is non-halachic is therefore irrelevant for the question of mamzerut, since the couple were never legally married.
now the Karaites also have a divorce process. It's not like the get that we have. It's very different. So we would not recognize their divorce. But it doesn't matter.
Why would we need to?
Well, you might want to say that if they were married, they should be divorced. And if a Karaite woman who was married but divorced according to Karaite laws might still be a married woman, perhaps we'll say it was Kiddushei Bi'ah, but actually it is not relevant at all until you get to the following, okay? In other words, a Karaite woman is always considered to be a single woman as far as rabbinical Jews are concerned, even if she was married and divorced. because the marriage was never a valid marriage, therefore she doesn't need a get. So whatever they do, they do. A problem does arise, however,
in relation to a Karaite couple who married halachically and then divorced under Karaite law. The divorced woman's children from a relationship with a Jewish man will then be mamzerim, and that stigma is passed on for all time.
What?
now do you know, if the wedding was valid and the witnesses were valid witnesses, and then you have a non-halachic divorce, then you have a problem. Because if the woman was married halachically, but not divorced halachically, she never lost her status as a married woman. And then when she goes off with another Jewish man and has children, they will be mamzerim.
And not a non-Jewish man also.
No, a Jewish woman with a Jewish man, with a non-Jewish man, will never produce mamzerim. And therefore the Rothschild family, I believe, allowed their women to marry non-Jews.
But if she is a Safek Mamzerim, Mamzera, as it doesn't change, she's already a Safek Mamzer from the beginning, before.
Why is she is not, we're talking about the first generation, say.
Uh-huh.
The first generation, they may not have become Karaites yet. So the woman is married halachically. Then she becomes a Karaite and she doesn't get a get. Her children are mamzerim from a Jewish man. From a non-Jewish man, there'll be no mamzerim ever, okay?
Was not the
So if you want to commit adultery as a Jewish woman and have children with the adulterer, have adulterate with a Gentile, okay? That's the golden rule. All right. Their mamzer offspring. Now we're looking at that one generation of transition between being regular rabbinical Jews, and then according to the theory that Anan ben David created the Karaite movement in the 7th or 8th centuries, that generation will produce a lot of mamzerim because they started out being married under halakha, but they divorced under Karaite law, which is not recognized. And therefore, Shmuli, their mamzer offspring, line 28.
Yeah. Their mamzer offspring will increasingly infect the Karaite population over time, and if marriage with rabbinate Jews is permitted, there will then be a dramatic rise in the number of mamzerim in the regular Jewish community. In the 13th century, Reb Shimshon of Sens, one of the Tosafists
or as we say in Gateshead, Reb Shimshon Mishantz. Okay, it's actually Rabbi Shimshon of Sens in northern France, one of the
Tosafists of northern France, declared a prohibition on marrying Karaites for the above-mentioned reason, and also because they did not adhere to the same laws of prohibited relations, arayot, as in halacha.
So you could have people marrying their relatives, which will be regarded as arayot, that will also produce mamzerim. He also comments
that they do not practice yibum and chalitza.
And even though the generally accepted view is that if you do not do yibum and you do not do chalitza, but you have children anyhow, they will not be mamzerim. There's a view in the Gemara that they will be mamzerim. So Rabbi Shimshon of Sens puts everything together and says no marriages with Karaites because of the fear that they are mamzerim or descendants. And remember, once a mamzer, always a mamzer until the end of time. Okay? It simply goes from one generation to the other. Don't be misled by the fact that in the book of Dvarim, Parashat Ki Tetzei says, Lo yavo mamzer bikal Hashem ad dor asiri, lo yavo lahem bikal Hashem, until the 10th generation. But in the preceding verse, it says, Lo yavo amoni umamzer bikal Hashem, gam dor asiri lo yavo lahem ad olam. So we make a Gzera Shava and we say that just as the Ammonite and the Moabite can never be allowed to marry into the Jewish community forever, and it doesn't mean until the 10th generation, it means even the 10th generation, which you might have thought would stop the stigma of Mamzerut, but no, Mamzerut continues until the end of time, okay? So Rabbi Samson's ruling
is cited in the Beit Yosef on the Torah and was added to the Shulchan Aruch by the Ramah.
Okay, if you like, you can read the Ramah.
Shulchan Aruch Even Ezer Hilchos Piru Revia Hagor. Hakarim Asul Hitchatem Bahem. וכולם הם ספק ממזרים, והם מקבלים אותם אם רוצים לחזור, כמו שכתוב בתשובות רב שמשון.
Okay, so they are at the best safek mamzerim, doubtful mamzers, and therefore we cannot marry and we cannot take them back into the fold, even if they want to do tshuva, because this has nothing to do with their views. They may want to be good rabbinic Jews, but they are tainted by mamzerut. The majority of commentators, Shmuel, you might as well finish the mitzvah.
On the Shulchan Aruch follow the Rima, as do a whole slew of later codifiers, Chochmat Adam and Aruch HaShulchan.
Well, the Chochmat Adam was Rabbi Abraham Danzig, 18th century Vilna. Aruch HaShulchan was Rabbi Yechiel Michael Levi Epstein, who died in the early 20th century, the Rabbi of Novardok, and author of the great code Aruch HaShulchan. Nitivot HaMishpat, Rabbi
Melissa.
Loberboim, from Lisa, from Poland, the Nesivus, and the Shulchan HaEzer, who concludes as follows. Achen, Shmoni?
Achen Kobal Yisrael Yotzim.
B'yad Rama.
B'yad Rama.
Where does that pasuk come from? He's paraphrasing a pasuk.
In Sumot.
When Bnei Israel left Egypt, it says, Bnei Israel yatzu miMitzrayim b'yad Rama, and he plays on the Ramah. Their Ramah is with a hey, which means a high hand, but now we put Ramah Rabbi Moshe Isseris, okay, which says no marriages with Karaites. The Pasak,
Hakarim Asul Hitchatem Bahem.
So there we have it. I'm going to stop the share. What we'll be reading next week is a response of another Egyptian rabbi, the Radbaz, Rabbi David ibn Abu Zimra, who Jean mentioned earlier last time, who apparently says you may or he might be able to permit marriages with the Karaites. How and what happened? All that next week, same time, same place, but you'll just have to wait with bated breath for the Radbaz and also for the situation in Israel today, because it became a live matter in the 1970s and 80s, and we'll see whose view prompted the change in government policy. It's always interesting when you add Israel to the mix. So for the time being, for this evening, that is it. If anybody has a comment or a question, now is the time. Otherwise, I will bid everybody a Chodesh Tov.
Chodesh Tov.
No, we have a point.
I come back with my questions. The first question is, finally, the Karaite who respect the Torah word by word should not take rebate.
When it comes to money, you can be very frum according to Karaite law. It doesn't say rebate, it says respect the Moadim. That's all. When it comes to money, Hefsed Merubeh, Karaites can enjoy that too. Okay. Next
is Midyovaisa?
What?
Second question. In the time of Rabbi Mizrahi, I suppose there were Rabbanit who became Karaite because they were convinced, and vice versa. Have we any data about these movements?
Okay, I have not explored the question of data. It's a little difficult to find out. It's a bit like asking about conversion data in medieval Europe, okay? We would assume that there wasn't much, but we just simply do not know. Now, what happens is the Karaite community, Jean, became smaller and smaller. So we can assume that if there was a change in any direction, the Karaites becoming, it's a bit, if you like, I'm going to be risky and say the conservative movement in the United States today was at one time quite a popular movement, okay? Yes. It combined halakha with modernization, but it didn't have the soul to pass on. So it became a religion for rabbis, and conservative Judaism is shrinking, okay? And the adherents of conservatism will either go Orthodox, or they will leave the fold, or become Reform. So something similar probably happened with the Karaite movement. And I've met more than one conservative rabbi, admittedly of the older generation, who has said that my success is measured when my congregants who come to my temple leave it and go to the Orthodox shul. Because I know that at least their children have a much better chance of keeping the mitzvot. So I think that the facts speak for themselves. Data, I'm not sure. But the fascinating thing that I find is how Rabbi Eliyahu Mizrahi repeats twice in his tshuva that he misses the fact that there's no interaction about Torah between the Rabbanites and the Karaites, because in his view, study of Tanakh is made richer by the fact that we have a group of people who offer a different interpretation based upon the text. And if you learn Ibn Ezra, on more than one occasion, he takes issue with a Karaite interpretation, but he's forced to try and prove that the rabbinical interpretation is correct. Now, that means he's very much into grammar, the meaning of the text, and Tanakh. Whereas if you look at today's yeshivas, many of them do not take Tanakh seriously at all. And the Mizrahi, who's most famous to this day for his commentary on Rashi and defending Rashi against Ramban, and also explaining many of the things that Rashi said, naturally would have felt that the fact that there was no discussion between Karaites and Rabbanites made the level of Torah wisdom lower in the Rabbinite community. That's what I find very fascinating, together with the fact that the description of what went on in Constantinople, I mean, is quite something, okay, as all the hallmarks of what we've seen very recently and we would regard as being very uncivilized behavior. But there we are. It happened in Constantinople, the 15th and 16th centuries. People became incensed, and that is what they did.
Finally,
Okay.
the tshuva of the Rambam is, as I said, perplexing, because from one side, he considers that they come back, and from the other side, he compares them to Goyim when he says Mefakrim aleim et hagal. Here he compares them to Goyim.
No, you have to read it a little more carefully. The bit about the Goyim is at the end when he talks about Darkei Shalom. There's no obligation. Well, you know, don't go into Goyim. The Moridin v'lo Ma'alin refers to the Mumar or the Mushumad, not to the non-Jew. What he's saying is that Darkei Shalom, a bit like when in the Tshuva on Giur, he talked about Et Lasot Hashem, Heiferu Toratecha, Takanat Hashavim. These are simply, if you like, ethical ideas that help explain why there should be interaction. But the Rambam's position is interesting because in his Mishneh Torah, he differentiates between a Tinok Shenishba and a hard line, Mumar or Karaite. He doesn't talk about the idea of reciprocity, that you should get along with them well if they respect us. That is missing in the code. That only appears in the Tshuva, and that clearly reflects what happened when you have intellectual figures such as Rambam or Rabbi Eliyahu Mizrahi dealing with a group such as the Karaites in their community. And remember, this is a contested group. Rabbi Kapsali was anti-teaching the Karaites. He was much more defensive. Let's insulate ourselves from people who have a different form of Judaism to us. So in that sense too, it's plus ça change. We go back in history and we find the issues come up all the time. So I'm going to wish everybody a very good evening. As I said, a Chodesh Tov, special Chodesh. It's a Chodesh of unity. Chodesh HaShlishi, Vayichan Yisrael neged Ahar, the whole of Israel came together, and as Rashi says, Ki'ish echad belev echad. Halavai.
Halavai.
Okay,
Halavai.
that's it for this evening, folks. Next week, Radbaz on marrying Karaites. Would you believe it? Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.
Erev Tov.
Erev Tov. Erev Matsuyan.
Erev Tov. Chag Sameach.
Oui, next week.